this Athens Academy presentation. Earlier this year, in October, I was invited to go to the Athens Academy to do this presentation on composting and climate change and things you can do to make a difference. And I had the opportunity to speak to about 600 kids, I guess, and teachers. And it was fantastic. It was, I realized this is probably what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm an arborist. I climb trees for a living. That's one of the things that I do. Okay, good. So I climb trees for a living. I work on trees. I make compost. I compost organics from supermarkets, restaurants periodically. I also compost animal mortalities. And the idea is that we're going to take these nutrients and return them to the earth. Creative Earth is a nonprofit I created to teach environmental education. So hopefully down the line I can get some funding and I can make this my full-time gig. So right now I do all these other things and I get to do this once in a while too, so I hope you enjoy it. And as me with some big pumpkins from Whole Food stores, they dumped them out and we thought that they looked too cool to compost that week, so we kept them around for a while. I'm teaching the kids at Washika about composting and things that are organic and things that are inorganic. So when we do this program with them, we put something plastic in with the compost. And then when we come back the next week, they can see that everything else is gone, turned to soil, except these pieces of plastic and these things that are not organic, so they get an idea. Also, when I did this presentation for the kids, I reminded them, because I know this is an important thing, and it's kind of a tough thing to talk about, but there's 6.5 million people on the planet today. And that number goes up like this by one. Every second, there's 1 or 2 more babies being born. And 9 billion people by 2040, that's a lot of mouths to feed, it's a lot of strain on the resources of the planet. This is the North Pole. The sea ice has been melting really fast. Right now, there's so little sea ice in the summer that they're predicting by 2015 there'll be no sea ice in the summer. And that has catastrophic effects for the environment. This is Greenland. If all of this melts, and you've probably all seen that, if all this melts, 20 feet of sea level rise. But this is a pretty big piece of ice, but Antarctica is the real big cookie. And if that thing melts, then we're really in trouble. All right, the polar bears, the seals, everything that lives in these regions is under stress right now. Their ability to just survive is being put on jeopardy because of our actions as humans. This is a picture of Mount Hood, Oregon. I was there in '07. It doesn't look like that anymore in the summer. In fact, this is '84, this is 2002, and that's about what it looked like when I was there in '07. And you know, I wasn't up high, I was like on the mountain, so I couldn't really tell how much glaciers were left, but there's not a lot. It's almost gone, it's melting fast. And this slide here I have to keep changing. I actually just emailed James Hansen from NASA to ask him. I said, what's the second warmest year? Because I have this presentation I do, and I don't know where to stack these things. So he sent me an email back, and it's like this, all right? Last year was the second warmest year we've ever recorded on the planet. That is both ocean and terrestrial temperatures. It was actually the warmest in the southern hemisphere, but globally it came out as number 2, behind 2005. And what he said to me was that these other years are so close together that you might as well just call them number 2 tied, because they're like something to being tied for second. So the planet's getting hotter. So the idea that it's getting cooler because we had a cold spell and Florida was 25 degrees in Tampa last week is ridiculous. Globally, the temperature is getting hotter. So here's my new slide, and there's 10 of them, but we only go up to 5. But look at, 98, all right? That was the second warmest year tied with the other ones there, but the planet's just getting hotter. And we need to do something about it, or, the ice is going to melt, and it's going to be bad for everybody. So, and this is where I got some of this information, if anybody wants to check. I just like to tell a slide. Those are the guys who do all this stuff. And I just talk about it. 70% of our planet's covered with ocean. Most of the oxygen we breathe comes from the oceans. And this is a really important thing because right now our oceans are getting beat up by a number of different things. Plastics, for one thing. There's a pile of plastic out in the Pacific Ocean that is the size of Texas. And there's lots of animals out there, albatrosses and sea mammals and fish that are eating these little bits of plastic because as they break down, they start to look like something that, yeah, I think that looks like a shrimp. And those things get stuck in these animals and they don't digest. And albatross babies are dying by hundreds or thousands every year because they can't process these pieces of plastic that their parents are bringing home and shoving down their throat saying, hey, this is a fish. And he's like, okay, but really it's a piece of plastic. And these animals are dying because of it. So there's a lot of problems with our oceans. They're absorbing so much carbon dioxide right now that they're starting to acidify. We used to think that oceans absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, that's great, right? All right, we got our carbon sink. But what's happening is there's so many tons of millions of tons of carbon being absorbed by the oceans that the oceans are starting to become acidic, which is killing coral reefs. It stops these organisms that make shells from calcium from being able to absorb the calcium they need. So krill, like the bottom of the food chain that feeds the whales, and all these other critters are being affected by the acidity of the oceans. These are phytoplankton. They're one of the smallest critters in the ocean. They absorb CO2, they release oxygen. That's where most of our oxygen in our atmosphere comes from. It comes from these phytoplankton. We're having a decrease in phytoplankton right now because of what's happening with our oceans, because they're getting warmer. And we're having ice melt. This is a picture from NASA. This is the areas in red are the areas where the phytoplankton are blooming. So when we have these phytoplankton blooms, you can see it from space. There's so much activity going on there that these coastal areas in the red are where the phytoplankton are absorbing the oxygen and they're growing rapidly. That's why all the whales and everybody wants to go up there in these regions and feed. And now as we're making the oceans more uninhabitable for the smaller animals, the bigger animals are having to deal with that also. And also, if the oceans get too warm and too much ice melts, we might stop the flow of the ocean conveyors, which will be a whole other problem to deal with. And here's the blue whales, the largest animals on the planet, larger than any dinosaur ever was, and they feed on those smallest of organisms. Business as usual. I think I stole this slide from one of your movies. But that's okay, right? All right, so by 2048, I saw this great movie. It was called End of the Line. And I was just like, wow, we need to do something. I need to tell these kids about this. So this slide's from that. And 90% of the big fish in our oceans are gone. And right now we have the technology to harvest every fishery in the ocean in like a month. That would mean no more tuna, no more cod, no more flounder. All the big fish, we could harvest them like this. That's how much technology we have. So regulating how much fish we're going to eat is important. So every time you go to the store and you buy something that was wild caught in Indonesia, you got to think, well, how many other people are buying this, and what kind of a strain is that putting on these fisheries? And if all the fish are gone by 2048, what are we going to eat? Cows, I guess, but that's a whole other big problem. And they're cutting down rainforests too, so we've got more room to grow cows so everybody can have a cheap hamburger. And so we're losing biodiversity here. We're losing our planet's ability to sequester carbon and make oxygen through our rainforests also. And biodiversity is just a real pretty little stream. It's kind of got a little bit of everything. And if you turn over rocks in there, you'll find these little bugs underneath there. So join you on. Go out there and look for bugs under rocks. It's a lot of fun. Greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide and methane are two of the largest greenhouse gases that we have to be concerned with. And one of my big things as a arborist and a composter and a landscape consultant was making good topsoil. And I realized at some point that I could not only make good soil and make the plants grow better, make the soil respirate better, but I can also slow climate change by keeping organics out of the landfill. When I showed this slide at Athens Academy, I pointed out a couple of things. One, this is 1950 on the bottom. This is after World War II. And you can see how many people were being born, how many cars are going on the road, how many new factories there are. Look at the CO2 levels. They just skyrocket from 1950. If you look at the graph on top, you'll see where CO2 levels were, and then when the Industrial Revolution started, we're off to the races. So I asked the kids in the room, how many of you drove here today in a car that gets less than 20 miles to the gallon? And they didn't want to admit it, but you know, we have to think about our impact, every one of us. And here's methane. Methane stays in the atmosphere for only about 12 years. So if we can keep methane from getting out there to begin with, it's even better. The stuff that's up there will dissipate. And it's a very, very powerful greenhouse gas. A lot of methane is made by decomposition of organic matter. And one of the things that they're talking about now is taking methane from our landfill gas, which has got all kinds of stuff in it. It's not just methane. There's everything that you throw in the garbage that goes in the landfill is releasing some kind of gas as it breaks down. What they want is they want the methane gas, but putting organics in a landfill to make methane is the wrong. It's like burning a couch in your living room to stay warm. All right. This is permission I got from the state back in 2000, giving me permission to divert food waste from the restaurants and supermarkets in town. I was doing about 35 stores around town, and it took me 6 months of beating on the doors of the right people and writing letters and preaching my case, and finally they said, we're going to let you do it. So there's a copy of this down at the Athens Park County General File. And this is Earth Day 04. I went around and picked up the food waste from the restaurants downtown. This is East West Bistro. My friend Lamar Thomas was helping out. And so we had a great day. We took in about 3,000 pounds of organics, and I just set that up that one day. I said, I'm going to do this one day for Earth Day. Is everybody ready? I gave them buckets, and boom, we took out 3,000 pounds of organics out of the waste stream that day. This is Whole Foods. Last year I took, this stuff is better than most of the stuff I've got in my vegetable drawer. I just want you to know how much stuff we throw out, you know? But 25 tons a week they would bring me, 2 trips. 2 times a week they would dump about 12 tons of food waste. And this is produce, fruits and vegetables and some bread and some chickens and whatever, but we take this and we're going to turn it into soil. And think that's only 6 stores. And just think how many stores there are in the state of Georgia that throw the organics in the landfill. There's something like 800,000 tons of food waste goes in our landfill every year. And that's an old number, so it's probably a lot more than that now. And all that organic waste in the landfill makes methane gas. The largest release of methane gas in this country is from our landfills. And this is one of the tubs that we use to collect the food waste in. This is mesophilic composting, so anybody who has composting questions and they want to grow, you need to go about it by not like, I'm going to try to make compost and get rid of my organic scraps, keep them out of the garbage. You got to think, I'm going to grow bugs. And so if you make the conditions right, you'll grow bugs. You can see there's a pineapple up there, there's a banana, and all this stuff just growing out of the pile. There's a lot of millipedes, centipedes, earthworms, and just there's a billion bacteria in a teaspoon of compost. So that's how you do it. And these little things that we do, also by creating this compost, it helps the soil, where you spread it, it helps the soil breathe. It helps the roots in the ground from the trees and the plants better sequester carbon and better infiltrate water. So all of these things, by the act of composting, taking that banana peel and just tossing it in the woods instead of throwing it in the garbage can, it makes a little difference. And so you're actually slowing climate change and helping the planet a lot by making compost. You're not throwing your organics in the garbage. And yeah, that's more about that. And there's a little seedling growing. And I take these out of my compost pile and I put them in my garden. And this is some vegetables from my garden. So through the act of composting, we can create good soil. We can grow our own food. One of the things I tried to stress to the kids was how important it is to to be a good consumer and think about all of the products that you're buying. Where's it from? I wish those were made in Athens, Clarke County, those steel bottles, but they're all made in China, aren't they? Now, there's good opportunities for lots of stuff to be made local. We've got lots of steel recyclers. Somebody should open up a foundry. Isn't that what they do at a foundry? They make stainless steel bottles. Hey, that would be a great little business, just in case somebody's got a lot of money and nothing to do. But grow your own vegetables. Buy local. Because what our actions make a difference. Every time you buy something from China, it's being shipped across here in these big, huge boats burning, I don't know how many thousands of tons of CO2 they put out, how many gallons of oil has to be burned. So you can have this little plastic whatever that's probably going to wind up in the landfill because it's unrecyclable. So we need to think about buying locally. This is the compost piles down at Hancock Road. This is my composting facility. We're moving materials, and you can see the heat being generated from that. Those are thermophiles that generate that heat. It's a bacteria that lives in temperatures from about 100 to 160 degrees. And then when it starts getting hotter than that, you got to be careful because you can start a fire, because I found that a couple of years ago. So we're moving the pile. That's why my loader, and we're going to stack it here. And now the way this is built, it's all the wood waste that's there is local product. I took in about 5,000 yards of ground wood waste from a development that happened up behind Publix off of Atlanta Highway, the Mitchell Bridge Road. There was 20 acres that was cleared up there. And they brought me those grindings, and then I used those grindings to make the compost. That's the carbon source that we use to add to the food waste. And these are some bacteria, because I always wanted to have a picture of bacteria. It's like, what do these things look like, you know? But this is a magnified picture of bacteria, and there used to be sound in this slide, but they're the smallest things on the planet. The bacteria and the fungus, the smallest things on the planet, are also, by far, probably the most important things on the planet as far as life goes. So we have to think about bacteria as not being a bad thing, but being as something essential to our own being. All right, now this is the part that everybody goes, oh, yes, I compost mortalities. I haven't been able to get a volunteer yet who, like, you know, so there's no grandmas in my garden yet, but deer, no problem. Roadkill's all over the place. You see, what do they do with these animals when they die on the side of the highway? DOT comes, they throw them in the truck. You know where they take them? They take them to the landfill. So these animals wind up in the landfill. Here's an interesting thing about that I just found the other day about cemeteries. We put 16% of the mercury emissions in the UK were from fillings from people being cremated. Globally, I think it's something like 9% of the mercury that's in our environment is from fillings from people being cremated. Now, mercury's not good for you. It's in all the fish that we eat now, and it's in our water, our bodies. So it's something that we have to think about these things. 1.6 million tons of reinforced concrete buried in the U.S. every year so that we can put our boxes in the ground. So you eat all this great stuff, you spend your life enjoying life on Earth, and then we put you in a piece of concrete down in the ground, or we cremate you, and you do bad things when you leave. We don't need to do bad things when we leave. There's other ways to do it. I'm not saying that you dig a shallow grave in your backyard, but there's other ways that, you know, green cemeteries, and eventually down the road somewhere, I'm hoping that we can start composting mortalities, and you can go back to the earth. So my son Brett here has been doing this since he was a little boy. And we took this deer, we put it in this pile, which was 120 degrees at the time we added this deer. And 2 days later, it was 160 degrees. Because what happens is these bacteria will just start to break down. The bacteria will start to break down the animal. It's like a crock pot. There's so much heat and moisture in there that the animal just turns to stew. And, you know, it could be a banana peel, it could be an elephant, it could be, you get the idea. It could be your dog. It breaks down and it turns to soil. And so we can come back as soil. We don't